to a new episode of Crafting with Cosplay Fabrics. My name is Indra, and today I want to show you some ideas and tips on things that you can do to better store your costumes and your crafting items. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to say that this is something that I have found that has helped me throughout the years. I've been doing this for 15 years. So these are just methods that I have found that they are the most beneficial as far as how I store things because of the amount of space that they take, but also because I find that I'm actually able to access my items a lot easier, and it's so helpful to have it in a way that it feels like I'm not overwhelmed by the amount of things that I have. I'm sure that this is something that maybe you are familiar with, is that when you have so much stuff and so many random items, when we craft, we have paint and brushes, but then there's also thread and then random stuff that you don't really know what to do with. So I hope that this is something that you will also find helpful, but please just keep in mind this is something that my personal experience, and I do hope that this sort of guides you into maybe an idea of how maybe you can put your stuff away. But also, I want to say that you'll find that there's sort of a common theme of sorts with how I put my things away, or how I organize my things, and that is that I try to categorize things, and I try to compartmentalize things, but also I try to keep things in a way that I can see them. I've shown you guys before how I store my fabric, and you might actually see it right behind me. I like to roll my fabric and put it in facing, so that then I can see everything that I have. I'm actually, a lot of people are actually very surprised because they think that I would have a much bigger fabric stash or something like that, but it's because I'm always seeing my fabric, so I'm always using it, so I'm constantly going through it, and I'm never buying twice of maybe a fabric that I already have, or and I try to constantly keep everything at a certain volume because I'm less likely to over accumulate items, which used to happen to me a lot. I used to have oh my gosh, I was such a fabric hoarder and hoard all these different random things that I didn't know, but I love them so much, and they inspired me so much that I just wanted to keep it. And I don't know for what, but someday I was gonna use it for something. And even though I still kind of do that, I try to minimize that, and this has started to happen when I started to organize my space in this manner. Especially when you can see the stuff, then you're more likely to say, oh, but I have this, I can use this. Or to know okay, I only need X amount of that one thing. So let's get to it, and I do hope that this helps you out. So first thing is just miscellaneous items. This is stuff like trims, zippers, anything kind of that has maybe a weird shape. So first is separating everything into categories, and what I like to do is store them in transparent boxes. And I just buy these little Tupperware kind of just storage boxes at the dollar store, and I just put a label in the front you'll see, and I just stack them one on top of the other, and it's super easy to just see exactly what it is that I have. And that way, whenever I'm looking for, do I have this, for example, this box is zippers, and do I have this zipper, so that way I can just go through the box and I can easily just see what it is that I have. It's already separated for me. It's not in a random shopping bag or anything like that. And it was a really cheap box, so it's super affordable as well. The next thing is thread. I have them separated into the large cone threads that, the kind that you use for your serger, or if I have any big projects, I'll also buy those big cones. And separate to that, I have just regular size thread. For the large cones, I use a large box, just just like this one, just like the one I had shown you before. And I just put all the cones in there and I label it that it's like the large thread. For the smaller thread, I use just like a pencil case. And what I like to do is just to keep them color coordinated. And that way I can also travel with it if necessary, because sometimes I end up like sewing on the go. But the other way that you can do it is if you have like a little rack, you know, to keep all the threads that you are going to be using. So, you know, the ones that look like they have little like wooden like little tabs that you could just like slide your thread into that. That's also a great way. I personally like to keep them closed just because when I used to do that, I found that a lot of my threads ended up getting damaged. Either by whatever was around, like environment or humidity or whatever, or a lot of times, like, I also found that they would just get full of dust. And even though, like, you might clean or anything like that, you know, you don't really think to always, like, be dusting your, like, thread rack. And I don't know, I actually like, usually when you have that type of thing, your threads are usually just like facing up. So you don't really get to appreciate like the color. I need to see it. And in this way, I can actually see the colors that I have. I do recommend that if you can get like a transparent case, like that way you can actually see everything that you have. But if not, something kind of like this also works. So hopefully that does the trick for you as well. As far as bobbins go, I do the same thing. It's just separating it and just putting it all in a box. Obviously, they're much smaller, so it's a little bit more difficult to like trying to keep them into one space. But they do also have like small boxes where you could just put them like in a row. So I do recommend using stuff like that. Always try to have things stored in a way where you can see them. Okay, so next is patterns, and the way that I have my patterns is this is a small bookcase, and I just have them facing up, and that way I can just kind of go through it. That way they're all facing forward. That way I can just easily see, like, you know, what pattern it is. And I could just easily like take it out or put it back in. I do the same for paints. I have them, let me show you. I have them right here, and I have them so that I can see the color of all of them that I have. For wigs, I like to keep them in these types of bags or Ziploc bags. Usually wigs already come with a bag that's kind of like this style, but sometimes they come in boxes or other packaging, and I'll just get those really large Ziploc bags and I'll just put it in there. I try to keep them flat. I like to store them flat, but if for some reason the style has a lot of curls or I'm afraid it might get like squished or ruin the wig, I do try to keep the little cardboard thing that comes with wigs. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Some wigs come with like a little frame, like a little cardboard frame, so I'll keep that if I feel like it's necessary to maintain the style of the wig. But otherwise I try to just keep it flat. Some I do keep with like the netting, but some other ones, you know, throughout time, like that kind of stuff gets lost or whatever, so I just try to keep them like in Ziploc bags. And what I do is I'll keep them in those types of transparent drawers, and I try to store them by color. I separate them all by color, and that way I'll keep them all like in, for example, like browns and blacks, that type of like more natural colors in one. Then I'll do like cool colors, like blues, greens, that type of thing, and then I'll do like pink and white and that kind of separation. And I do try to keep them all flat, and that way like all stored one next to the other, and that way it's easy for me to kind of go through them. And it does help to have like a really large type of drawers. That way, if anything, I can always just like take the whole thing out and go through it. So the big one is how to store costumes. And the way that I store costumes is in two ways. One is I keep those types of plastic and fabric closets, and these I keep in my garage. And those are the costumes that I wear the most often. They might be the newer costumes and the costumes that I constantly like go to, or I find that the only way that I can store them is by hanging them. And I know that sometimes it's very difficult with some costumes because they might be a little bulky or something like that. So I try to keep only like the most important or the newer or the stuff that I use the most in those types of little closets. The other way that I store them is in bins, in just like those huge bins. And what I do is I will write in the front of it all of the pieces of the costume that are inside that box. And this is something I've been doing for years. This is actually something that I did, and funny story how I used to organize for when I worked for the theme park for Busch Gardens. We had so many boxes and so many things, and the only way that we could actually store it was by same method, compartmentalizing. So I share this from like a professional like background, that this is how I organized all these costumes like all those years ago, and now I use it for my own like costuming. So I find that this is so helpful, and that way I know that all my costumes are all in one place, and when I use them I just put them back into that box, and if anything changes I just write it off or scratch it off at the front. And all it is just like pen and paper right at the front. You can of course get fancier and type it up if you want to, but because I'm constantly like adding or removing pieces from, you know, during storage, I find that it's easier just to keep just writing it or scratching it off or erasing it or whatever. But I do recommend though that if you do plan on storing your costumes anywhere where humidity can get to it, and I learned this from personal experience and unfortunate experience, is that humidity does get to it. And the same thing is with moths or anything that could potentially ruin your costume. Take precautions for those types of things, like even if it's like mothballs, or even using those types of, they come in like containers, that it's those like humidity catchers, because all of these elements will and potentially ruin your costumes. I thought I was safe by just putting them away in my garage, and it actually turned out that a lot of them got ruined because I didn't take those precautions. So that's why I tell you, just a heads up, if you are storing this way, make sure that you do take precautions to make your costumes last the longest time. Another tip is that when you are putting your costumes away, be it in the box or if you store them in a closet or anything like that, is to also keep either cedar boxes, like they are those like long little, they look like logs almost, because that will also help with any sort of humidity. And also the dryer sheets that you use, well, dryer sheets, the ones that you use for laundry, those help to keep your costume smelling fresh, and to keep them from also having like a stagnant kind of like smell to them. So that will definitely help with that. The other thing, it also helps with static, which can also, funny to say, but that could also potentially like ruin your costume. And the other thing is that if you are storing any sort of plastic item, anything that is vinyl, anything like that, make sure that you are storing it, like wrapping it either in wax paper or even tissue paper, like the kind that you use to wrap presents. And that always helps with anything that could potentially stick to another piece. A way to store props is by actually either putting a pegboard in your wall. and then putting all of your props on the wall or hanging them up. That way you have them all visible and away from like bulking them all together, because I find that that tends to ruin props. Or another way is if you have to store, say, things like small firearms, like fake ones, of course, is by just putting them in a small basket and then just putting them one next to the other. That way you see exactly what it is that you have and any accessories that may go with it as well. So obviously there's a lot of like random stuff when it comes to like costuming and crafting that is a little bit difficult to put away, but I do hope that this gives you some ideas on what you can do and how you can store your items. I definitely recommend using even the most like random stuff, like, you know, bookshelves, racks, anything that you can actually put on walls and items that you can see what it is that you have. Think outside the box and use boxes, and I hope that this also gives you an idea of maybe how you can redo your crafting space. So I hope that this helps you, and as always, if you have any questions or concerns, leave them in the comment section below. If you have any other ideas of videos that you would like to see, let me know. I would love to hear from you, either here or if you want to, you can always DM me. All my information is in the info box below. I hope that you like and subscribe, and I will see you next week for another tip, trick, or tutorial featuring Cosplay Fabrics. See ya!